The air in Isaac's tent was still and heavy, permeated with the scent of old age and earth. The years had piled up on his shoulders like desert dust, and the vision that had once been sharp enough to discern the stars had now clouded into a constant gloom. In that stillness, he called his son, his firstborn, his Esau, the favorite. Esau, a rugged and vigorous man of the countryside, entered the tent. His very presence was a contrast to his father's frailty. "Here I am, father," he replied in his deep voice, an echo of the strength that made him a formidable hunter. Isaac, his voice weakened by age, confided his last wish. "My son, I am old, and I do not know when my end will come. Take your weapons, your bow, and your quiver. Go out to the field and hunt for me. Prepare a stew with it, with the taste that pleases me so much. And when I have eaten, I will give you my blessing." A father's blessing is not just a word. It is the destiny of your future. It is a prophetic declaration that will mark the path of your life and that of your descendants. With these words, Esau felt the weight of what was being asked of him. The future of his lineage was about to be sealed. Without hesitation, he took up his weapons and left the tent. The midday sun beat down on his back as he headed toward the plains, his mind filled with thoughts of the hunt and the solemn ceremony that awaited him. What he didn't know, however, was that a shadow, his mother Rebecca, had overheard the conversation and was already weaving the first thread of a plan that would change everyone's destiny. Rebecca, the wise and perceptive woman, had not been far away. From the shadows, she had heard every word Isaac had said to Esau. Her mother's heart raced, not because of the pain of seeing her favorite son leave, but because she remembered an ancient prophecy revealed to her by the Lord. The elder would serve the younger. This plan of Isaac's contradicted God's will, and Rebecca, convinced she must act, saw in that dinner the opportunity to right the fate of her sons. With the urgency of someone who must act before it was too late, Rebecca sought out her youngest son. "Jacob," she called in a whisper. Her voice held a note of conspiracy and haste. When Jacob arrived, Rebecca revealed what she had heard, leaving no room for doubt. "Your father has asked Esau to prepare a stew to give him his blessing, but the fate, my son, belongs to you," she said. "Now, listen to me carefully," Rebecca continued, a plan already formed in her mind. "Go to the flock and bring me 2 fat young goats. I will prepare them with the flavor your father loves so much, and it will be you, not your brother, who will take them. Thus, you will obtain the blessing that is yours." With these words, Rebecca set in motion a bold and risky plan, weaving a web of deception that would test not only Jacob's faith, but also the future of God's promises. Upon hearing his mother's bold plan, a shudder of fear ran through Jacob. He, a man with soft, gentle skin, was the complete opposite of his brother Esau, a hairy, rugged man. "Mother," he said in a trembling voice, "but my brother Esau is hairy, and I am not. If my father touches me, he will see through the deception. He will think I am mocking his blindness, and instead of blessing me, he will curse me." The risk was too great. Rebecca's response was as swift as her decision. "My son," she answered with complete conviction, "don't worry about the curse. Let it fall on me if that happens. Just do as I say, and trust in me." She knew the blessing was for Jacob, and her faith in God's plan was unwavering. With these words, Rebecca allayed Jacob's worries and convinced him to follow the plan that would change the course of their lives forever. Fueled by his trust in his mother, Jacob acted without hesitation. He went to the flock and brought the 2 goats she had requested. With the skill of an expert cook, Rebecca prepared the stew that Isaac loved so much. The aroma of herbs and cooked meat filled the tent, and Rebecca hurried to the next step of her plan. To make the deception complete, Rebecca took Esau's best clothes, which she kept in the tent. These clothes, impregnated with the scent of the countryside and the game of her eldest son, were the key to impersonating him. Jacob put them on, feeling the heavy fabric against his body. Then Rebecca took the goatskins and strategically placed them on Jacob's arms and neck. The coarse hair and texture of the skin simulated Esau's hairiness. Now, Jacob's disguise was so convincing that even if his father touched him, the impression would be that of his brother. Finally, with the stew and the bread in his hands, Jacob stood before his father, his heart beating with a mixture of fear and determination. The fate of 2 brothers was about to be decided in that tent, and the taste of the stew would be only the beginning of a long and complex story. With his heart pounding, Jacob entered the tent and called out to his father. "My father," he said. Jacob's voice, despite his attempt to imitate Esau's, sounded strange in Isaac's ears. "Who are you, my son?" Isaac asked, sounding uncertain and suspicious. "I am Esau, your firstborn," Jacob replied firmly. "I have done as you asked. Arise, eat some of my game, and bless me." The quick tone and the speed with which Jacob had returned alarmed Isaac. "How did you find him so quickly, my son?" he inquired. Jacob, without hesitation, replied, "The Lord your God set him before me." The name of God on Jacob's lips reassured Isaac, but his youngest son's voice kept echoing in his mind, so he asked him to come closer. As Jacob approached, Isaac touched him. His hands, covered by the goatskins, felt rough and hairy like Esau's. Jacob's voice was Jacob's, but the hands were Esau's. The contrast was confusing. "The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's," Isaac murmured. his mind struggling to reconcile reality with his senses. Still hesitating, Isaac asked one last question for confirmation. "Are you really my son Esau?" "Yes, I am," Jacob replied, with a determination that left no room for doubt. Hearing the answer, Isaac accepted the deception. He ate the stew and drank the wine Jacob offered him. Then, he asked him to come closer so he could kiss him. When Jacob bent down, the scent of the field and game from Esau's clothes filled him. Finally, Isaac had no more doubts and was convinced that the man in front of him was his eldest son, the true owner of the blessing. With the deception consummated and the stew devoured, Isaac felt strengthened. The aroma of the countryside emanating from Jacob's clothing, convinced that he was his son Esau, transported him to a place of peace and profound certainty. He sat down, and with a voice that, although tired with age, was filled with ancestral power, he raised his hands to bless his firstborn. "God grant you of the dew of heaven and the fruitfulness of the earth, abundance of grain and wine." These first words were not a simple wish for prosperity. They were a legacy, a promise of wealth that only the land could bestow upon a leader. "May the peoples serve you and the nations bow down to you." Here, Isaac granted him not only wealth, but power. The power to rule over the nations and be recognized as a leader. "Be lord over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow down before you." This was the most important and momentous part of the blessing. Isaac, unknowingly, was reversing the birth order, giving Jacob dominion over his older brother and his entire family. "Cursed be he who curses you, and blessed be he who blesses you." With this phrase, Isaac sealed the blessing. Now, Jacob's future was tied to the hand of God. His destiny was sealed. He would be the leader of the family and the bearer of the promise God had given to Abraham. With each word, Jacob felt the weight of what he had just received. The blessing intended for Esau. The blessing that would forever change the course of their lives and that of future generations. Fate, capricious and swift, moved with cruel swiftness. No sooner had Jacob left the tent, the echo of the blessing ringing in the air, than Esau returned from hunting. The fatigue of the day was reflected on his face, but a feverish anticipation gleamed in his eyes. He had fulfilled his father's request, and the aroma of his stew was the promise of his future. With the confidence of a firstborn who knows his place, Esau entered the tent. "Get up, my father, and eat some of your son's game, so that he may bless me," he said in his powerful and vigorous voice. But the answer he received was a chill. Isaac's voice cracked, not from weakness, but from icy panic. "Who are you?" Isaac asked, the horror of doubt in his voice. "I am your firstborn son, Esau," he replied, confused. The name Esau, spoken by his true owner, sent an emotional shock through Isaac. A deep tremor, coming from the depths of his soul, shook him. "Who was it then who brought game and gave it to me?" he exclaimed in a voice filled with pain and despair. "I have blessed him, and blessed shall he be." The irrevocability of the blessing weighed on him like a stone. There was no turning back. The word given was law. The impact of his father's words struck Esau with the force of lightning. He understood the deception in an instant. A cry filled with bitterness, a lament that welled up from the depths of his being, filled the tent. "My father, bless me too," he begged, his voice cracking with pain. It was the plea of a man who had lost everything for a bowl of stew, and now lost it again because of his own brother's deception. Esau's cry of pain filled the air of the tent. With tears streaming down his face, he clung to his father, begging for what was his due. Isaac, heartbroken by Jacob's deception and his son's anguish, confessed the bitter truth. "Your brother came deceitfully and took away your blessing." Esau's despair was uncontrollable. "Did you not reserve a blessing for me?" he cried between sobs, imploring his father to give him even a little of what his brother had stolen. Esau's pain was not only material, it was the pain of being stripped of his birthright, his place in the lineage, and God's promise. Isaac, in a tired and weak voice, explained the weight of what he had already done. "I have made your brother lord over you. I have given him the grain and the wine, and servants will support him. What can I do for you now, my son?" Isaac's blessing to Jacob was so powerful that there was nothing left he could give Esau. The father's word, once given, was law. But Esau did not give up. He pleaded with desperate insistence. "Do you have only one blessing? Father, bless me too." His plea was a heartbreaking lament. Moved by his son's affliction, Isaac spoke words of comfort and prophecy over Esau. "Your dwelling place will be far from the riches of the earth, and without the dew of heaven. You will live by your sword, and serve your brother. But the time will come when you will throw off his yoke." Esau's blessing was not one of prosperity and dominion, but a blessing of struggle and overcoming. His future would be marked by constant effort and battle, but also by the promise that, one day, he and his descendants would be freed from Jacob's rule. Esau's pain and humiliation transformed into a poison that corrupted his heart. His soul shattered by his brother's betrayal and the loss of his blessing, Esau was overcome by a profound hatred. Without saying a word, he kept his bitterness and thirst for revenge deep within him. "Soon the days of mourning for my father will end, and then I will kill my brother Jacob," he thought to himself. He didn't mind waiting. His father's death was the price he was willing to pay to satisfy his thirst for revenge. But Rebekah, with a mother's intuition, sensed her firstborn's latent anger. Upon learning what Esau was planning, fear gripped her heart. His plan, which had borne the fruit she desired, now threatened the destruction of her family. She couldn't allow the life of her beloved son to be lost at the hands of her own brother. Acting with the same swiftness and determination that had led her to plan the deception, Rebekah sought out Jacob. "Your brother, Esau, is plotting to kill you," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "Run away. Get out of here. Go to Haran to my brother Laban's house. Stay with him until your brother's fury passes. I will send for you when it is safe." With these words, Rebekah gave Jacob a new destiny. The chapter of blessing ended, and a new chapter of exile and loneliness for Jacob began. His escape was not an end, but a new beginning on his life's journey. Rebekah's plan had achieved its purpose, but it had also sown the seeds of a conflict that would separate the brothers for many years. Unbeknownst to her, Rebekah had set in motion the events that would lead Jacob to his destiny. After the tumultuous and painful episode of deception, Isaac, although distressed, regained serenity and clarity. He understood that God's will, which he had tried to change, had been manifested through the unexpected paths of Rebekah and Jacob. He called his youngest son this time for a solemn farewell and a conscious blessing, free from any shadow of doubt. "Do not take a wife from among the daughters of Canaan," was Isaac's first and categorical instruction. It was vital to preserve the purity of his lineage and not mingle with the people of the land. "Go to Padanaram, to the house of your grandfather Bethel, and there take as a wife one of the daughters of your uncle Laban." Jacob's mission was not only to flee, but also to ensure the continuity of the patriarchal family. Then Isaac raised his voice and pronounced the blessing that confirmed everything that had happened. "May Almighty God bless you, make you fruitful, and multiply you until you become a multitude of peoples." This blessing was not about land or dominion, but about life and lineage, the fundamental promise given to Abraham, and to seal Jacob's destiny, he added, "May he give you the blessing of Abraham, so that you may possess the land where you now live as a foreigner, the land that God promised to Abraham." With these words, Isaac publicly acknowledged Jacob as the true spiritual heir, the bearer of God's promise of land and descendants. Jacob's destiny was irrevocably sealed. He was the son of promise. With the weight of this immense inheritance on his shoulders, he left Beersheba, the place where his father and grandfather had lived. He left behind his home, the wrath of Esau, and the shadow of deceit, to undertake the long and lonely journey to Haran, where he would begin his life as the future father of a nation. Esau watched Jacob's departure not only with resentment for the stolen blessing, but with a growing, bitter understanding. He realized that his brother's exile was not merely a flight from his wrath, but a mission ordered by their father Isaac to secure a suitable marriage outside of Canaan. Upon reflection, Esau realized something painful: his own marriages to the daughters of the Hittites had been a source of constant distress to his parents. The land of Canaan was their home, but its wives were unsuitable for the family promise. Isaac's message to Jacob was a tacit condemnation of his own choices. In a belated and desperate effort to redeem himself in his father's eyes, Esau sought a lineage he considered more acceptable. He went to the house of his uncle Ishmael, Abraham's son and Isaac's brother. There, he took Ishmael's daughter Mahalath as his wife. With this act, Esau intended to cement his position in the patriarchal family and, perhaps, regain some of his father's esteem. Although it was already too late for the blessing, but this marriage was a superficial measure. It could not undo Jacob's deception, nor the fact that he himself had despised his birthright. Esau now carried his past mistakes and the bitter taste of betrayal, while Jacob walked away toward his own destiny. With the weight of the blessing and the fear of Esau's revenge on his shoulders, Jacob set out for Haran. Each step took him further from the familiarity of his home in Beersheba and deeper into the vast and uncertain solitude of the desert. He was a fugitive, alone and vulnerable, without the physical protection of his parents. But with the immense promise of Abraham beating in his soul, after a long journey under the sun, night began to fall, and Jacob stopped. He looked for a place to rest, an anonymous spot in the landscape. There was no inn or tent for the heir of the promise. He simply picked up a stone from the ground, the hard, indifferent material of the earth, placed it under his head like a rough pillow, and lay down. The silence of the countryside was profound and total, an immensity that contrasted with the tumult of his heart. The starry sky unfolded above him, an infinite dome of cold lights. As he closed his eyes, overcome by fatigue and anxiety, Jacob fell asleep. He was in a place he considered a mere desolate wilderness, unaware that this corner of the desert was about to become the portal to a divine encounter. While Jacob slept, exhausted on the desert rock, heaven opened to him in a vivid and transcendental dream. He saw, with the clarity of revelation, a ladder rising from the earth where he rested to the heights of heaven. Along this luminous path, he observed the angels of God in perpetual motion, ascending and descending, connecting the earthly realm with the heavenly. And it was there, at the summit of that imposing structure, that glory was manifested. The Lord himself stood, God's voice resounded in Jacob's dream with unmistakable authority. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. With these first words, the Lord validated the blessing Jacob had obtained through deception, confirming him as the rightful heir to the covenant. The promise that followed was twofold. The land and the offspring, the land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. You will spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth will be blessed in you, and in your offspring. God granted him a vast offspring, ensuring that the purpose of his lineage would transcend his own family to bless the entire world. Divine protection, I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go and bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have fulfilled what I have spoken to you. This promise was not conditional. It was the guarantee of God's constant presence. Jacob, the lonely fugitive, now had the creator of the universe as his personal protector, assuring him of a safe return to the land of his fathers. The vision disappeared, but the divine pact was sealed. Jacob would awaken transformed, knowing that his life was no longer his own, and that even in the most desolate place, God was with him. Jacob awoke from his sleep with a start. The vision of the ladder and the voice of God seared into his mind. Terror, mixed with profound wonder, invaded him. It wasn't the fear of the desert's solitude, but the awe of one who knows he is in the presence of the sacred. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it, he exclaimed. He had fled home and thought he had left God behind, only to discover that the Creator had come to seek him out in his helplessness. The weight of the revelation made him tremble. How awesome is this place! It is none other than the house of God and the gate of heaven. The anonymous place where he had slept had been transformed into a threshold, the point where the earthly met the divine. Without wasting a moment until dawn, Jacob transformed the place. He took the rough stone that had served as his headboard and erected it upright, turning it into a pillar or memorial marker. Then, in an act of profound consecration, he poured oil over the top of the stone. This symbolic act marked the place as holy, a makeshift altar. To this site, once known as Luz, Jacob gave an eternal name, Bethel, meaning house of God. Immediately afterward, Jacob, his heart filled with the promise he had received, made a solemn vow, a response of faith to God's commitment. It was not a negotiation, but a declaration of loyalty. If God is with me and keeps me on this path I am taking, gives me food to eat and clothes to wear, and brings me back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord will be my God. His vow continued with a promise of dedication and faithfulness. This stone, which I have set up as a pillar, shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. His vow continued with a promise of dedication and faithfulness. This stone, which I have set up as a pillar, shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. With this covenant, Jacob not only accepted God's promise but also committed himself to a life of worship and generosity. The lonely fugitive became a pilgrim on a mission. Marked by God's word and his own commitment, Jacob resumed his journey toward the land of Laban, carrying with him the certainty that God would go before him. Jacob, strengthened by the promise God had made him at Bethel, continued his journey eastward. After many days of walking, he came to a field where there was an open well. 3 flocks of sheep were resting around the well, for they were given water from that well. The well had a large stone covering it, and they used to wait for all the shepherds to arrive to move the stone together and give the animals something to drink. Jacob, curious, asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" They replied, "We are from Haran." Jacob rejoiced and asked with excitement, "Do you know Laban, son of Nar?" They replied, "Yes, we know him." Jacob persisted, "Is it all right?" They replied, "Yes, it is. And look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." While they were still talking, Rachel approached with her father's flock. When Jacob saw her, he was moved. He ran to the well, moved the large stone that covered the mouth of the well himself, and watered Laban's sheep. Then, filled with emotion, he kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Then he explained, "I am Jacob, son of Rebekah, your aunt." Rachel, surprised and overjoyed, ran to tell her father. When Laban heard the news, he ran to Jacob, hugged him, and kissed him. He took him home, and Jacob told him everything that had happened. Laban said to him, "Surely you are my own flesh and blood." Jacob stayed at Laban's house for a month. After a while, Laban said to Jacob, "Even though you are my relative, you must not serve me for nothing. Tell me what your wages will be." Laban had 2 daughters. The older was named Leah, and the younger, Rachel. Leah had a tender look, but Rachel was beautiful in appearance and form. Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel and said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban agreed. "It is better to give her to you than to another man. Stay with me." So Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, but because of his love for her, they seemed like mere days. When the 7 years were over, Jacob asked for his wife. Laban held a great feast and invited all the men of the land. But that night, instead of giving Rachel away, Laban brought Leah, and Jacob joined her, thinking she was Rachel. The next morning, Jacob discovered the deception and said to Laban, "What have you done to me? Didn't I work with you for Rachel? Why did you deceive me?" Laban replied, In our land, it is not customary to give the younger before the eldest. Complete the marriage week with Leah, and then I will give you Rachel as well, in exchange for another 7 years of service." Jacob agreed. After the wedding week with Leah was over, Laban also gave him Rachel as his wife. To Rachel, he gave Bilhah as a servant, and Jacob loved Rachel much more than Leah, even though he had to serve another 7 years to pay for her hand. Seeing that Jacob loved Rachel more, God took pity on Leah and granted her children, while Rachel remained barren. Leah conceived and gave birth to her firstborn son, whom she named Reuben, saying, "The Lord has seen my affliction. Now my husband will love me." Then she had another son and said, "The Lord has heard that I have been despised, and he has given me this one also." She named him Simeon. Later she conceived again and said, "Now my husband will cling to me more closely, because I have borne him 3 sons." And she named him Levi. Finally, she had a 4th son, and exclaimed, "This time I will praise the Lord." And she named him Judah. After this, she stopped having children for a while. The years passed in Laban's house, and while Leah continued to bear children for Jacob, Rachel's womb remained barren. This silence became an unbearable burden, transforming love into bitter despair. Seeing her sisters growing offspring, Rachel was consumed by profound jealousy. She could not bear to be the beloved but infertile wife. One day, her anguish overwhelmed her, and she turned to Jacob with a demand that sprang from her pain. "Give me children, or I die." For her, barrenness was not just a sorrow. It was a shame that stripped her of her value and purpose in that society, making her feel that her life was worthless without offspring. Rachel's demand, born of pain, provoked an angry response from Jacob. He who had struggled with men and with God, felt powerless in the face of a matter beyond his control. His frustration turned to anger, and he harshly rebuked her. "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld fruit from you?" With that harsh truth, Jacob reminded her that the ability to give life was a sovereign gift from God, not a power he could bestow. Despite Jacob's rejection, Rachel did not give up. Determined to have children by any means, she resorted to an ancient custom to secure her lineage. With a cool head, she proposed a plan. "Take my servant Bilhah, she will bear children on my knees, and I too will have children through her." This practice meant that the servant's son would symbolically be born as the son of the mistress. For Rachel, it was the only way out of her barrenness and shame. By giving up Bilhah, the beloved wife was attempting to manipulate fate to force the blessing God had denied her, setting in motion a new cycle of jealousy and competition among Jacob's wives. Jacob accepted Rachel's proposal, taking Bilhah the servant as a secondary wife, according to the custom of the time. Soon Bilhah conceived and gave birth to a son. This birth was not just a biological event, but an emotional triumph for Rachel, an answer to her desperate plea. By taking the newborn as her own, Rachel felt she had reversed her dishonor. With a profound exclamation of relief and gratitude, she declared, "God has done me justice. He has heard me and given me a son." She believed she saw in this birth divine intervention that validated her worth. Therefore, she named him Dan, a name that would echo her affirmation, judgment or righteousness. But Rachel's relief was short-lived, as the competition with Leah was fierce. Bilhah conceived a second time, and Rachel saw in this new birth a continuation of the battle for superiority within Jacob's household. Giving birth to Bilhah's second son, Rachel interpreted the event with a mentality of spiritual and domestic warfare. "I have wrestled with my sister with godly wrestlings, and I have prevailed," she declared with the intensity of a rival who has just won a round. For her, each new child was a victory over her barren destiny and over her fertile sister. Filled with this combative spirit, she named the child Naphtali, whose name evokes precisely that wrestling or strife. Thus, the sons of Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali, became the standards of her own personal struggle for justice and primacy in the house of Jacob. When Leah realized that her own womb had stopped conceiving, she was filled with fear. Rachel's success, even through her servant Bilhah, forced her to react. The competition for children in Jacob's affections was a constant struggle, and Leah refused to be left behind. With a determination equal to her sister's, Leah took her own servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a substitute wife. It was a desperate strategy to continue securing her place and her lineage. Leah's plans soon bore fruit. Zilpah conceived and gave birth to a son. For Leah, this birth was not a mere addition to the family, but a sign of good fortune, a favorable turn in their bitter feud. As she held the child, her heart filled with exultant relief. "Good fortune has come," Leah exclaimed, interpreting the birth as a direct blessing. With this feeling of luck and favor, she named the child Gad, a name that means fortune or luck. The cycle continued, and Zilpah conceived a second son. This birth strengthened Leah's position and confirmed her strategy. She felt she had won a significant victory in the struggle for descendants. With deep satisfaction and a sense of having regained her esteem, Leah exclaimed, "How happy I am! The women will call me blessed." Her joy was not only for the son, but for the social recognition she believed she had gained. Therefore, she named Zilpah's second son Asher, which means happy or blessed. Thus, Jacob's house expanded through a web of jealousy and despair, where each new son represented a strategy in the sisters' feud. The fierce feud between the two sisters reached a new and strange climax with the discovery of some mandrakes. One day, Reuben, Leah's eldest son, returned from the fields with the curious plants. These roots, often shaped like a human figure, were believed to possess fertility-promoting properties. Rachel, the beloved but barren wife, saw in the mandrakes a hope, a last resort for conceiving. She didn't hesitate to approach her sister. "Please, give me some of your son's mandrakes," she begged, her voice thick with need. But Leah, the scorned wife, was outraged by the request. Her resentment, built up over years of feeling neglected in Jacob's heart, erupted. "Does it seem like a small thing to you that you have taken my husband from me, that now you also want my son's mandrakes?" she retorted bitterly. Jacob's possession was a battlefield, and Leah felt that Rachel had seized her husband, leaving her with only the crumbs of her time. Rachel, however, was too desperate to give up. Knowing that Jacob spent most of his nights with her, she proposed a bold trade, exchanging the hope of fertility for a night with her husband. "All right," Rachel agreed. "Let Jacob sleep with you tonight in exchange for the mandrakes." The beloved wife was sacrificing a night of companionship for the uncertain promise of a child. When Jacob returned from the field at dusk, unaware of the transaction, he encountered an unusual scene. Leah came out to greet him, not with the submission of a waiting wife, but with the confidence of one who has made a deal. With surprising frankness, Leah informed him, "You will join me tonight, for I have indeed hired you with my son's mandrakes." Jacob, confronted with the outcome of the bargaining between his wives, accepted the agreement. So, that night, Jacob slept with Leah. Jacob's rental for a handful of mandrakes underscores the sad reality of polygamy. Women's desperate struggle for offspring and love, reducing marital affection to a tradable commodity. Despite the night rented by mandrakes, Leah interpreted the outcome as a sign of divine favor. God, who had heard her pleas and seen her affliction, allowed her to conceive once more. Leah gave birth to her fifth son, and in this birth she saw a direct reward for her actions. "God has given me my reward, because I gave my maid to my husband," she declared. She believed that her act of generosity, albeit strategic and born of competition in giving, Zilpah to Jacob, had been recognized and honored by God. With this sense of divine recompense, she named the child Issachar, whose name means "there is reward." Shortly thereafter, Leah conceived for the sixth time, a remarkable testament to her fertility. This birth was no longer just an addition to her lineage, but a shift in the balance of power within the family. With 6 sons, she was undisputedly the mother of most of Jacob's offspring. With a tone of triumph and renewed hope, she exclaimed, "God has given me a good dowry. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons." She hoped that her abundant offspring would finally earn her Jacob's respect and, perhaps, his true affection. With this desire to be honored, she named the boy Zebulun, which means dwelling place or habitation, hoping that Jacob would finally decide to fully dwell with her. After the arrival of her 6 children, Leah's family was completed with the birth of a daughter. She named her Dinah. Her name, meaning judgment or justice, resonated with the same theme that had marked Dan's birth. But for Leah, this child represented the conclusion of her fertile period. With Dinah's birth, Leah's cycle as a mother paused for a time, while the narrative's attention turned once again to her sister Rachel, the beloved wife, still awaiting her own blessing. Despite all the manipulation and competition between the sisters, Rachel never stopped pleading. Her heart, though jealous, was torn by the affront of barrenness. Finally, the moment of divine grace arrived. The scriptures attest that God remembered Rachel. He heard her prayer and sovereignly opened her womb. She conceived, and, at the precise moment, gave birth to a son. This birth was for Rachel, the pinnacle of her life, the cancellation of the shame that had consumed her. As Rachel held her firstborn, she felt her honor restored. With a deep exclamation of relief, she declared, "God has taken away my disgrace." The stigma of barrenness, the mockery of women, and the humiliation before her sister were all erased by the arrival of this child. With a heart filled with this sense of liberation and victory, Rachel named him Joseph. But the name, which means he adds, not only celebrated the removal of past shame, but also looked to the future with bold faith. She was not satisfied with just one son. As she named him, she uttered a fervent prayer, "May the Lord add to me another son." Thus, Joseph's birth marked a turning point. It not only brought joy to his beloved wife and father, but also introduced the child who would become the centerpiece of Israel's future history. The birth of Joseph marked a momentous change in Jacob's life. With the arrival of his son from Rachel, his beloved wife, Jacob felt that the cycle of his exile had come to an end. He had fled to Haran as a lonely young man, but now he was the father of a dozen sons and the husband of 4 wives. He had completed the years of service agreed upon by his wives. With his heart set on returning to the land of his fathers, Jacob approached his father-in-law Laban to ask for his freedom. "Let me return to my land," Jacob said firmly. "Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and I will go." You well know how and with what dedication I have served you." The request was direct and legitimate. His time of service was over. Laban, a man of proven cunning, didn't want Jacob to leave. Jacob's success was the key to his own prosperity. With calculated sincerity, he begged Jacob to stay. "Please stay. I have learned by experience through divination that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Laban recognized divine favor upon Jacob and knew that the fortune of his house was tied to the presence of his son-in-law. Laban then attempted to secure Jacob's permanence with an offer. "Tell me what your wages will be, and I will give them to you." Jacob, however, was unwilling to remain the servant who increased another's wealth. In his response, Jacob reviewed his 20 years of loyal service. "You know how I have served and how your livestock has grown with me. The little you had before I came has increased greatly. The Lord has blessed you with every step I took for you." Recognizing divine favor and his own hard work, Jacob focused on his future. "But now, when will I also work for my own household?" The need to establish his own independence, to forge his own destiny in his homeland, was stronger than any wage Laban could offer. Laban, clinging to the blessing that Jacob's presence had brought him, insisted on keeping him. When Jacob refused to simply name a fixed salary, Laban prepared to listen to his son-in-law's proposal. Jacob, aware of Laban's cunning and determined to carve his own fortune, proposed a deal based on livestock, but with an unusual and specific condition. "Give me all your flock today," Jacob began. "From this moment on, from that flock, my wages will be the sheep and goats that are born of an unusual color, the spotted, the speckled, and among the sheep, all the black. These will be my wages." The proposal seemed harmless and even advantageous to Laban, since these genetic traits were recessive and generally rare in the region's livestock. Laban's flock was composed mostly of white sheep and uniformly dark goats. Laban quickly agreed, believing he was securing a minimum wage for Jacob. However, his distrust and greed led him to act immediately to manipulate the agreement. That same day, Laban didn't wait for nature to do its work. He took action. He removed from the entire existing flock every spotted, speckled, or black animal Jacob had named. Not only that, but he gave them to his own sons and placed them within a 3-day walk of Jacob. In this way, Laban ensured that Jacob's flock would start with absolutely 0 spotted animals. He sought to prevent Jacob from using these special animals in breeding, and thus, ensured that Jacob would not prosper too much. Jacob was left to care for Laban's remaining flock, which was the normal flock, while his wages were 3 days. Walk away, making the challenge of his prosperity almost impossible. Jacob faced an almost insurmountable challenge. Laban had emptied the flock of all blemished animals, leaving Jacob with the task of producing his wages from nothing, from white sheep and uniform goats. Rather than give up, Jacob resorted to an ingenious and observational technique. Jacob went to the fields and carefully selected green rods from specific trees: poplar, hazel, and chestnut. He then performed a process of visual manipulation. He stripped the bark in stripes, creating patterns. Removing the outer layer exposed strips of white wood, resulting in striped rods. He placed these rods, with their striking patterns, at the watering troughs right in front of the flocks. The choice of location was not accidental. It was there where the animals came to drink, and crucially, where they usually mated. According to the belief of the time, the visual impression at the moment of conception could influence the appearance of the offspring. Thus, when sheep and goats conceived while staring at the striped rods, they gave birth to offspring with the patterns Jacob had claimed as their wages: striped, speckled, and spotted offspring. Jacob not only relied on this technique, he also used cunning in his livestock management. He observed the times of greatest vigor in the flocks. When the strongest and most robust animals came to mate, Jacob placed the rods. When the weakest approached, he removed them. Furthermore, he made sure to separate his flocks, those born with the marks of his wages, and not mix them with Laban's normal flock. In this way, fortune favored Jacob's ingenuity. Despite Laban's initial deception, Jacob's flock grew exponentially with the promised marks. Jacob grew enormously wealthy. His prosperity was not limited to livestock, as he soon had a large number of sheep and goats, male and female servants, camels, and donkeys. The servant had become a man of immense wealth, laying the foundation for the nation that would bear his name. Jacob was no stranger to the atmosphere of hostility that was beginning to surround him. He heard the murmurs of Laban's sons, who were complaining bitterly, "Jacob has taken everything that belonged to our father, and with what belonged to our father he has acquired all this wealth." The envy was palpable, and Laban's own expression had changed. He no longer showed him the same favor he had before. Sensing the danger, God spoke to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." The promise was clear. Strengthened by divine guidance, Jacob acted cautiously. He summoned Rachel and Leah to the field, far from Laban's house in Ir, and explained the situation to them. "I see that your father's face toward me is no longer as it once was," he told them. "But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served you with all my might, and your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. Yet God has not allowed him to harm me. He has intervened on my behalf in the matter of the speckled young. The women, for their part, responded with surprising resolve. Do we still have a portion and inheritance in our father's house? Hasn't he considered us strangers, since he sold us and even ate our money? Therefore, do everything God has told you. Their wives were completely supportive. They felt that Laban had robbed them of their inheritance and were ready to leave. With his decision made, Jacob prepared to flee. He put his wives and children on camels. He drove all his livestock and all the goods he had acquired from Paddan Aram, putting some distance between himself and Laban. His departure was swift and secret. Jacob left without telling Laban, the Aramean fleeing stealthily. He feared that his father-in-law would prevent him from taking his daughters and grandchildren, or that he would try to confiscate the wealth. As Jacob prepared to escape, Rachel committed a daring act. She stole her father's household idols, or teraphim. These small idols could not only be objects of worship, but in the law of the time, their possession was believed to grant rights to her father's inheritance. 3 days after Jacob left, Laban was informed of the escape. Upon learning of the escape, Laban's anger flared. He gathered his relatives and gave chase, catching up with Jacob and his camp 7 days later, in the mountains of Gilead. Jacob and his family were at his mercy. However, in the stillness of the night, God intervened. Laban was confronted by the Creator in a dream, who gave him a stern warning. Beware of speaking rudely to Jacob. The next morning, Laban appeared before Jacob. His tone was reproachful, but his fury was restrained by the divine warning. What have you done, that you have deceived me and taken my daughters as prisoners of war? He retorted. I would have sent you away with joy and singing, with tambourine and harp. You didn't even let me kiss my grandsons and my daughters. I have the power in my hands to harm you. But the God of your father spoke to me last night and said, be careful not to speak to Jacob rudely. Then Laban added his real complaint. Why did you steal my gods? Jacob, unaware of Rachel's theft, responded vehemently. I left because I feared you would take your daughters from me by force. But as for your gods, whoever you find them with, let them die. With this reckless declaration, Jacob invited Laban to search the entire camp. Laban began the search meticulously, checking Jacob's tent, then Leah's, and the 2 maidservants' tents. Finally, he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel, with a cunning worthy of Laban's house, had taken the idols and hidden them inside her camel's saddle, where she sat on them. When Laban entered, she excused herself with the composure of an obedient daughter. Do not be angry, my lord, for I cannot rise before you, for I am accustomed to women. Laban, obliged to respect her excuse, searched in vain. He did not find the idols. Rachel's deception exhausted Jacob's patience. Filled with righteous indignation, he exploded in furious recrimination. What is my crime, and what is my sin, that you have persecuted me so fiercely? Jacob cried. He reminded Laban of his 20 years of faithful service, the day he found no animals to eat, the care of his flock in heat and cold, and how he had always borne the losses. You have changed my wages 10 times over, he concluded. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the terror of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away now empty. Faced with this undeniable truth, Laban proposed a peace pact. My daughters are my daughters, and my grandsons are my grandsons, and the sheep are my sheep. Everything you see is mine, Laban said, reaffirming his ownership of everything. However, he could not undo his flight. They set up a pile of stones as a testimony and ate there. Laban called the place Jegar-Sahadut, a heap of testimony, and Jacob called it Gilead, heap of testimony. Jacob promised Laban that he would not mistreat his daughters or take other wives. Laban said a warm goodbye, kissing his daughters and grandchildren and blessing them. The next morning, Laban returned home. Jacob, free and blessed, continued his journey, leaving behind 20 years of deceit and service. After the tense farewell to Laban, Jacob continued on his way, freed from his father-in-law's tyranny, but heading straight for his greatest fear, the face of his brother Esau. As he traveled, he had an extraordinary encounter. He looked up and saw a camp, but it wasn't of men. It was God's angels who came out to meet him. This vision was a powerful reminder that he was not alone, and that the promise of protection God had given him at Bethel still stood. Seeing this heavenly host, Jacob exclaimed, "This is God's camp." In honor of the vision, he named the place Mahanaim, which means 2 camps, his own and that of the heavenly messengers. God's presence gave him a brief moment of peace before the impending danger. Despite the angel's vision, Jacob's human fear was overwhelming. He decided to send messengers ahead to warn his brother Esau of his approach. The messengers were sent to the land of Seir, the region of Edom, where Esau had settled. Jacob instructed them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have been with Laban, and have stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, sheep, male and female servants. I am sending word to my lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." Jacob demeaned himself, using the title servant to try to soften his older brother's anger. The messengers returned with terrifying news. "We came to your brother Esau, and he too is coming to meet you, and 400 men with him." Esau's intention was uncertain, but an escort of 400 men did not bode well for a peaceful reception. Jacob's heart was filled with great fear and anguish. Fearing an attack, he divided all the people, livestock, and camels who were with him into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the other camp will be able to escape. Cornered between the possibility of Esau's revenge and the Jordan River, Jacob took refuge in prayer. His plea was not a mere request, but an appeal to God's covenant. O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your land and to your kindred, and I will do you good. Jacob reminded God of his own promise. Then, with humility, he acknowledged his unworthiness. I am less than all the loving kindnesses and all the truth which you have shown your servant. For with my staff I have crossed this Jordan, and now I am in 2 camps. He recognized that everything he had was an undeserved gift from God. Finally, he made his most urgent request. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he come and smite me, and the mothers and the children. And thou hast said, I will do the good, and thy seed shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered. Jacob placed the fate of the divine promise squarely in God's hands. After the prayer, Jacob sought to add action to his faith. He spent the night meditating and prepared an immense gift or present for Esau, an attempt to appease his fury before meeting him face to face. The gift was meticulously organized: 200 goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. Jacob divided this enormous gift into successive herds and placed them under the care of servants, ordering them to go ahead. To each servant, he gave the same instruction. When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, whose are you? Where are you going? And whose is this that you are carrying in front of you? You shall say, it is a gift from your servant Jacob to my lord Esau. And behold, he is coming behind us. The idea was that the staggered arrival of the gifts would soften Esau's spirit, repeatedly striking his heart with generosity. Jacob thought, I will appease his anger with the gift that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. That night, Jacob led his family and possessions across the ford of the Jabbok. After sending his family and belongings across the brook, Jacob was left alone. In that solitude, in the darkness of the night, a mysterious and pivotal event occurred. A man wrestled with him until dawn. Jacob held on with such tenacity that the man later revealed to be God or his angel could not overcome him. Seeing that he could not defeat him, the man struck Jacob in the joint of his thigh, and Jacob's hip was dislocated as he struggled. The man said to him, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob, wounded and limping, refused to let go. I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked him, what is your name? And he replied, Jacob. Then the man declared, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. The name Israel, meaning he who wrestles with God, or God wrestles, marked the culmination of his transformation. The deceiver Jacob was renamed Israel, the Prince of God. Jacob asked for the name of his opponent, but he refused to reveal it, and instead blessed him there. Jacob called the place Peniel, meaning the face of God, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and my life has been spared. Jacob crossed the Jabbok ford at sunrise, limping from his hip. He bore on his body the indelible mark of his encounter with God, a wound that symbolized his new identity. The morning sun illuminated Jacob's face, who now walked with a pronounced limp, the physical reminder of his nightly struggle with the divine. Looking up, the horizon darkened with the vision he had so dreaded. Esau was approaching, and behind him, a column of 400 men whose footsteps raised a thick cloud of dust. Jacob, the strategist, made his final move, but this time it was not to deceive, but to protect. He arranged his family in a hierarchy of affection and security. At the front, the servants with their children, then Leah with hers. And in the most protected position, at the rear, he placed Rachel and young Joseph. However, the new Jacob Israel did something unprecedented. He took the lead himself. He no longer hid behind his possessions. He advanced alone toward his brother's army, and in an act of absolute surrender, bowed down 7 times until his feet touched the dust of the road, humbling himself before the one from whom he had once taken everything. The silence of the desert was broken not by the clash of swords, but by the sound of feet running across the sand. Esau, seeing his brother's vulnerability, could no longer bear the armor of his resentment. He ran to Jacob, wrapped his arms around him, and held him close. The kiss that followed and the tears they both shed on each other's necks sealed one of the most powerful reconciliations in history. 20 years of hatred evaporated in an instant of pure humanity. When Esau recovered, he looked in amazement at the crowd accompanying Jacob. Who are these? He asked. Jacob, his voice trembling with emotion, spoke not of merit, but of grace. They are the children God, in his generosity, has given to your servant. Then, a procession of humility followed. The handmaids Leah, and finally, the beloved Rachel with Joseph, approached one by one to bow before the man they had, moments before, considered a death sentence. Esau, still bewildered by the magnitude of the gift he had received on the journey, tried to refuse it. "I have enough, my brother. Keep what's yours." It was a declaration of prosperity, but also of peace. But Jacob insisted with a theological urgency. For him, accepting the gift was the confirmation of forgiveness. "No, I beg you," Jacob said. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept my gift. For seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, because you have received me graciously." This statement directly connected to his experience at Peniel. If the previous night he had survived the encounter with divine justice, this morning he was surviving the encounter with human justice. In the end, at Jacob's insistence, Esau accepted the animals, transforming the tribute into a bond of brotherhood. Esau, in a gesture of protection, proposed that they march together, offering his army as an escort. However, Jacob now, a man of peace and wisdom, gently declined. He knew that his pace was no longer that of a warrior, but that of a father and a shepherd. "My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that the flocks and herds are nursing. If we tire them even one day, the whole flock will die." Jacob promised to proceed step by step, at the pace of the weakest, until they met again in Seir. Esau returned to his own lands, finally leaving Jacob in peace within the borders of the promised land. Jacob did not rush. He paused at Sukkot, where he built shelters, and finally arrived at the city of Shechem. There, in an act that reclaimed his inheritance, he bought a plot of land for 100 pieces of silver. It was not just a piece of land, it was his first home of his own in Canaan. On that spot, he erected an altar and named it Elilo, his real God, the God of Israel. The man who had fled as a usurper had returned as a prince, acknowledging that the God who had blessed him in heaven was the same one who had restored him before his brother on earth. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, Bible Space. By doing so, you not only support us, but you also ensure you don't miss any of the fascinating stories we're preparing for you. Every week, we'll uncover more stories of faith, courage, and miracles. Turn on the bell so YouTube will notify you every time we upload a new video. Join our community and continue exploring the stories that have shaped human history.